Hi friends, welcome to my channel Literature Guide. I am Vinay and I have recently started this particular channel for the students of English literature, and today's video is about one of the important poetical forms, the elegy, and it contains origin and features regarding this particular poetical form. I hope you will definitely like this video and continue supporting my channel Literature Guide.
The elegy. The origin of elegy can be found in ancient Greece. Theocritus, Bion and Moschus have been considered as the pioneers of elegy. These poets of ancient times had great impact on the English writers. Theocritus's Idylls and Epigrams attracted the attention of many English poets. He was probably a Sicilian poet. Theocritus's poems depict the life and art of the rural rustics. In his pastoral poems, the reader can find a fine blending of realism and idealism. Bion was a Greek pastoral poet, and his only complete work is Lament for Adonis. The great Roman poet, Virgil, imitated Theocritus in his The Eclogues and Georgics, and afterwards he perfected this poetic form and made it famous. Moschus, a poet from Syracuse, also composed many pastoral poems. The reader can hear echoes of all these great poets in the elegies of Edmund Spenser, John Milton, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Matthew Arnold. For the Greeks, any composition in elegiac metre was called an elegy. The elegiac stanza comprises the quatrain of iambic pentameter rhyming A B or B. But elegies were composed in dactylic hexameters and pentameters paired as couplet in ancient Greek verse, and the subject matter was deemed as a subordinate thing. In elegies, the reader can find a lamentation for the death of particular person, which usually concludes on a note of consolation. Such elegies are the medieval poem Pearl and Geoffrey Chaucer's Book of the Duchess in the 14th century. John Donne's elegies have been written in couplet form. Thomas Gray employed the elegiac stanza in his famous poem Elegy, written in a country churchyard. It should be noted that no rules are laid down for the metre of an elegy. There were war songs, love poems, and lamentations for the dead composed in elegiac metre. But later on, the meaning of elegy had undergone a change. Pastoral Elegy. Pastoral elegy is a special kind of elegy. Here, the poet represents himself as a shepherd mourning over the death of his fellow shepherd. It is a work of art which follows a pastoral convention. There is a formal invocation of a muse. The poet laments over the death of his intimate friend. He also complains about the negligence on the part of the guardian angels and nymphs for their inability to protect his friend. Nature also responds to the mood of the poet and expresses her sorrow for losing the lovable and favorite person. It means that both the poet and nature lament over the great loss and share the same feeling. A.R. Entwistle comments, "Sometimes death is the inspiration and sole theme, at other times it is merely the common starting point from which poets have launched various themes, speculations on the nature of death and the hereafter, tribute to friends, the poet's own mood, even literary criticism." Edmund Spenser's Astrophel is a pastoral elegy in which he lamented the death of his contemporary Sir Philip Sidney. The elegy deals with Spenser's grief about the decline of pastoral form of his period. The poem was published in 1595. Similarly, Edmund Spenser's The Ruins of Time is highly pessimistic, and here, the poet expresses his sadness for the loss of great men and the growth of mean things. The elegy conveys Spenser's tender feelings for his friends and contemporaries Sir Philip Sidney, Leicester, and Walsingham. The Ruins of Time is the very first poem of Spenser's complaints, containing sundry small poems of the world's vanities, which was published in 1591. The elegy is a critique of contemporary social and political conditions. John Milton's Lycidas is a famous pastoral elegy, and it is a tribute to his friend Edward King. In this poem, John Milton followed the footprints of Theocritus' lament for Daphnis in his famous pastoral elegy Lycidas. In this elegy, the poet speaks as if he were a shepherd lamenting the loss of a fellow shepherd. Milton weaves into the design not only pastoral scene but mythology, Christian belief and contemporary controversy in the Church in England. In this poem, Milton invokes the aid of muses to compose this poem. He recalls the happy days he had spent at the University of Cambridge with his dear friend Edward King. Edward King had drowned in the River Dee, which shocked Milton very much. Milton wondered what the nymphs had been doing when Lycidas was drowned. Then, the poet realizes that even the nymphs could not protect their son Orpheus. Thus, John Milton's Lycidas is a quintessence of pastoral elegy. Ben Jonson's On My First Sown is also an elegy. Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard is another fine example of a pastoral elegy. Thomas Gray, in this poem, expresses his sorrow for simple, unnamed village people who lie buried in a quiet churchyard, probably in the village Stoke Poges. In this elegy, Thomas Gray talks not of the greatness of these people but of their simplicity and their ordinariness. Thomas Gray reflects on the obscure destinies of the rural rustics, but he also talks about the safety that obscurity granted them. The poem was published in 1751. Percy Bysshe Shelley's Adonis follows the tradition of the pastoral elegy. Shelley composed this poem on the death of John Keats. He modelled it on Bion's Lament for Adonis and Moschus's Lament for Bion. The poem draws inspiration from the Greek myth of Adonis, a handsome young man, who was loved by Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Adonis was killed by a boar. Aphrodite lamented over his death. Shelley's Adonis comprises 55 stanzas which are highly philosophical. Matthew Arnold's Theocritus, a pastoral elegy published in 1866. In this poem, Matthew Arnold laments the untimely death of his friend Arthur Hugh Clough, who died at Florence in 1861. He addresses his friend as Theocritus, in which he recalls his happy days when Arthur Clough and the poet would stroll around the Oxfordshire countryside. Matthew Arnold's Rugby Chapel, which was published in 1867. It commemorates the poet's father, Dr. Thomas Arnold, who was the headmaster of Rugby School. It is said that the school prospered rapidly during Thomas Arnold's period of service. Matthew Arnold has expressed his sincere feelings for his father. Tennyson's In Memoriam has also been considered as a fine elegy, but it does not follow pastoral tradition. Tennyson's In Memoriam was written on the death of his intimate friend Arthur Henry Hallam. Both Tennyson and Arthur Hallam loved poetry to great extent, and the death of his friend made Tennyson compose In Memoriam. The passing away of Arthur Hallam was a great loss for Tennyson. The elegy is written in octosyllabic lines rhyming ABBA. The poem is divided into 130 sections. Actually, the poem is a combination of lyrics. The poem deals with the ephemeral nature of human life and immortality. The elegy imparts a message of hope and unshakable faith. Thomas Sterne Eliot remarks, "It is not religious because of the quality of its faith, but because of the quality of its doubt. Its faith is a poor thing, but its doubt is a very intense experience." In Memoriam is a poem of despair, but of despair of a religious kind. Tennyson's elegy Break, Break, Break was published in 1842. It deals with the poet's tender feelings for his friend Arthur Hallam. In this elegy, Tennyson imagines himself sitting on the grave of his friend reflecting on human life. A.C. Swinburne's Ave Atque Vale is a famous elegy dedicated to Charles Baudelaire's poetry, in which Swinburne has referred to Greek myths and legends. In modern times, elegy has become an expression of sorrow or despair. Therefore, it should be characterized by sincerity of emotion and expression. Thus, it has primarily become a lamentation for the dead. It is less spontaneous than the lyric. So, it falls into the category of subjective poetry. One of the important aspects of elegy is the reflection on the part of the poet. It is because death is vast and evocative subject which leads the poet to speculation and the philosophy. Sometime death appeared to be a source of inspiration. There is speculation on the nature of death and the life after death. There are tributes and a note of consolation. Finally, there is realization that death is inevitable. It is the understanding that death is not the end, it is a fresh beginning. The poet emphasizes the immortality of soul in elegy. Though grief is in the beginning a dominant factor, the mood changes towards the end, and finally, the poet expresses his faith in the immortality and further reunion. Thus lamentation over the dead begins on a pessimistic note and concludes with a note of optimism and consolation. Though the poet expresses his grief, very soon he passes on to reflect on the sorry lot of humanity. As he goes on talking, the reflection leads to digression. But the digressions are in realization to the main theme. John Milton in Lycidas has talked about the degradation of poetry and corruption on the part of the clergies. Lord Tennyson has provided the puzzles of life and its philosophy. Almost all the elegies deal with the same theme. This digression of subject matter has been criticized by many critics like Dr. Samuel Johnson. It is because the sincerity of grief is always questioned because of digression. It is difficult for a person to shift from one topic to another like a philosopher when he is in a sad state. Some critics think that digression is necessary because the attempt of writing elegy is artificial. There are other examples of elegies which follow the pastoral conventions even in the modern age. W. H. Auden's In Memory of W. B. Yeats and Walt Whitman's When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed is an elegy on Abraham Lincoln. Walt Whitman's Elegy O Captain, My Captain, is dedicated to Abraham Lincoln. They are fine examples of modern elegy. A. E. Houseman's To an Athlete Dying Young and W. H. Auden's In Memory of Sigmund Freud are also fine elegies. Thus, elegy as a poetic form has been employed on large scale in every age, and it becomes the effective vehicle of expression for the poets. Please subscribe Literature Guide.